not rushing, I don't have food cooking. Legend of Zelda: The Twilight Princess, announced at E3 2004, has gone down in history as one of the most legendary game reveals of all time. I mean, the music. No, not Wii music, this music, the showmanship, the epic feel. It just can't and won't ever happen again. Not in an age of pre-recorded press conferences where nothing can go wrong and you can always just take a second take. It took place 3 years before I was born, and as most legends, it's gone down in history well enough to still be remembered today. It was a perfect swan song for the GameCube and the launch title for the Wii. It answered so many of the critiques of Wind Waker at the time, as so many hated the cartoon art style, and would have preferred the more serious tone the series was known for at the time. Not to mention, this was designed in part to make a more westernized Zelda game, as sales were declining in Japan with each new entry. Notably, this is the first Zelda game announced at a US event. The gameplay shown at the time looking not too unlike that demo at Space World 4 years prior, sharing similar artistic hues and designs. It was clear this is the Zelda game we all wanted. It was only fitting it would end up releasing on 3 consoles, the GameCube, GameCube 2, and GameCube 3. It was first launched on the Wii, and a month later would receive its release on the GameCube. With it being the only Legend of Zelda game with a teen rating, it's clear that something's different about this game compared to the others. This is not the bright and colorful worlds of Wind Waker. This is not pure good versus pure evil. It's a story about power and emotion. This game is built to serve these themes, with Midna going through dozens of revisions to better fit the game throughout development. She's not only a Twilight creature herself, she is the rightful queen of them. The first time we meet Midna is a good place to start after Ilia gets captured by King Bulblin, and Link runs into the Twilight to give chase. He then becomes Wolf Link, blacks out, and gets dragged into a prison cell. Average night out in the town. Midna then finds Link, and reasonably, Link does not trust Midna at first. She's the same species as what dragged him in after all. She tells him she will help him escape if he plays nice. She then breaks the chain to allow him to leave. Side note, that chain stays on his foot for the entire rest of the game. Once Link figures out how to leave the cell, Midna then jumps onto his back. Basically tells you to ask for help when you need it, and manipulates Link into doing what she says. I mean, quite literally, there's an argument to be made that for the first half of this game is purely from Midna manipulating Link. After this, they escape through the tunnels. They do a good job at setting the tone for the rest of the game. That's the way the game decides to introduce Midna. It all seems very carefully calculated, as all things do with this game handling Midna, as she is the main vehicle of storytelling for this game. It manages to leave the player with the perfect amount of trust in Midna. She strikes the perfect middle ground of an uneasy alliance, perfect ground for a story to explore. Midna's original concept was being the new companion for the sequel to the Wind Waker. Due to the game taking place on land, it was deemed unfathomable to have a boat on land. Boats don't go there. The character went through many revisions, and there are tons of Midna's baby art, but the earliest idea for Midna stayed with the core concepts like can't tell if she's an enemy or an ally, and goblin/devilkin, and the appearance of a monster or a child. These core concepts really shine through in the finished product. And when Wind Waker 2 got taken out back, this goblin character who later became Midna was brought forward into Twilight Princess. Nintendo described the development process of Midna being trial and error, with many revisions of Midna being slightly altered each time to make her look more natural than other games of the era. All of the work culminated in one of the best game characters of all time, debatably one of the best characters of all time. It is clear that the development team on this game worked incredibly hard to make sure Midna and the game as a whole was as good as it possibly could be, especially since the whole series was hinging on this one's success. Midna is the main companion to Link throughout Twilight Princess. What have we been talking about for the last 4 minutes? I mean, she is literally your shadow, and is in the title the fucking game. That's something Link can't say. No, heresy doesn't count. She is designed as to be as unobtrusive as possible. If the player speaks with her, they chose to speak with her. Unlike Fi, who will interrupt gameplay constantly to remind you of something you literally just read. She's integral to the gameplay, with helping Link take out Twilly and helping Link jump from place to place. Even in those situations, she doesn't come off as annoying or unnecessary. She just feels like an extension of the moveset, not stopping you in your tracks like Fi does. This is one of the key distinctions Midna has over all the other partners in the series. They either are absent unless necessary or way too obtrusive, while Midna manages to find a perfect middle ground for all types of players. I've never met someone who has played Twilight Princess and not liked Midna, even among those who don't like story. I think due to the decision to make her an extension of your moveset, along with some good writing, was a formula for one of the most well-liked companion characters in all of gaming. My personal favorite is the nonchalantness Midna has towards Link dying. She just floats up, face palms, game over, fades in, Just an average day at the studio. The midpoint of the game really is where Midna's character has the perfect turning point. She goes from manipulating Link to asking him to do things and helping him. The moment where Midna is dying on Link's back, still to this day, is one of the very few sections of any game to manage to draw out emotion consistently. It really is a testament to the writer and game designer's skill. The shift in Midna's character is simple but major. She no longer manipulates Link into completing tasks for her, she now asks him to do things and tries to help him complete those goals. The shift in Midna's tone and body language is gradual enough that some players might not even notice the change, but this is where it becomes most apparent. It's like the other side of the same coin. Like Hyrule in the Shadow World! However beautiful and emotionally achieving this scene is, this marks the beginning of another coin being flipped. This is the point where the goal shifts. It is no longer to find the fused shadows, but instead acquiring the Mirror of Twilight. And generally, this isn't a bad thing. If anything, the dungeons here feel even more unique and inspired than the earlier ones. However, this is where I believe the development team was informed of their new deadline, the Wii's release. Now, while I have little evidence to back up that claim, it seems apparent something changed around here. While this game is for the most part quite polished, it seems to me like the game was near completion, likely just starting to enter the polish stage. You know, where the less important stuff gets cleaned up, bugs are patched, etc. But if I had to guess, this is where the plans for more dialogue were cut short. In short, before this point in the game, the dialogue for Midna is always there. Every time you choose to speak with Midna, you have a unique piece of dialogue. However, the farther you get in the game, the less dialogue Midna has. It is possible that this is due to Midna being added later in development than it would seem for such an integral character, but it's so strange that they limited it to just one line of dialogue per dungeon. I mean, seriously, the last section of the game combined probably has less than 15 unique lines. Why is this important? A character's quality can be based on so many things, but one of the core parts of any character is how human they are. How human are the emotions, animations, actions, motives. And while I don't think it's fair to expect there to be 30 different pieces of dialogue in a single dungeon, I would have liked to have seen at least 3. Considering this game came out in the same era as Paper Mario the Thousand Year Door, with characters like Umbella who have literally thousands of lines of text, it just seems to lend a bit of credence to my theory the developers likely did not have time to polish Midna's dialogue the same way the developers of Thousand Year Door did. If I'm not mistaken, for multiple dungeons later in the game, there is one piece of dialogue from Midna the entire dungeon. Not one for perhaps before the boss or during the boss, not a separate one for when you're just entering the dungeon. I mean, ultimately, these aren't key to the game experience. However, when I hit the button to speak to Midna and got the same line of dialogue, despite being significantly further, it just felt jarring. It took a bit of that human element from Midna, despite all the effort they put into every other aspect of her. Considering this is really noticeable past the halfway point in the game, which is the point in the game where Midna starts to open up further to Link and be less harsh to it, it almost cheapens the shift into character. Now, the second part of this is pretty obvious. If it was truly rushed, wouldn't the fact the HD version of the game exists and still doesn't have any major additional dialogue disprove this theory? This at first glance has some good logic to it. However, Nintendo did not develop the remake. Instead, it was developed by Tantalus Media, meaning they did not have the same control nor creative liberties in making changes to the game. Additionally, by that point, the games were separated by nearly a decade. To put this into perspective, the original game released about 7 months before I was born. The HD remake came out when I was 9, just a year before I first started to learn how to code. So I don't think it's exactly out of the question for decade-old notes or ideas to have been either lost or forgotten in regards to additional dialogue. So what evidence do I have that this game being rushed beyond this? And to be clear, I don't think this game was rushed to the same degree as something like Call of Duty or Cyberpunk, but I do get the sense the core of the game was completed, including the dungeons and world. However, things that would be added at the very end, like making sure the box art was using an up-to-date build and an additional unnecessary character dialogue, seems cut out from the game. In many games, even in this era, if you're speaking to an NPC for the second time, they will often have a new thing to say, even if it's just rephrased. It is important to remember that basically every launch title for every console has to be rushed to some degree, because they just cannot afford to delay the console for the game. This is further evidenced by the Wii's box art being rushed, where it contains a magic meter, which isn't even in the game. This also means by the end of development, they are making massive changes to the game, and the addition or removal of the magic meter is pretty significant. If they're making massive changes to the game at the end of development, like removing the magic meter, it would stand to reason that they wouldn't have time for things like flavor dialogue with Midna. Ultimately, this game seems to have fallen victim to what many launch titles do, being rushed right at the tail end of development, which is fine, it's not ideal, and maybe one of the few things holding this game back from being, without question, my favorite game. This is one of my favorite games of all time, in great part due to its gripping story and characters. Its feeling isn't one of hate, it's one of seeing what it could have been and what other perfection it could have reached. This game is an example of one of the few times Nintendo valued story on an equal playing ground as gameplay, and it paid off beautifully. And due to its more linear nature, it manages to pack in way more story than many other games in the series, all while avoiding many of the pitfalls of an overly linear game like Skyward Sword. Fuck, I took too long.